Have you ever said something about money that you've never actually stopped to ask whether it's true? Statements like, I'm just not good with money. I could never afford an investment property. Or maybe you've even said real estate is too risky. Or I love this one, I don't want debt. Or maybe you're saying to yourself, people like you don't invest. And we say these things as if we're reporting facts, but sometimes they're not facts at all. Sometimes they're stories that we've told ourselves, stories that we've heard from other people. And we've repeated them for so long that we don't even remember where the story came from. I know this because for a very long time, I had my own story about money, and it took getting about $60,000 in debt for me to realize I didn't understand money nearly as well as I thought I did. And believe it or not, the $60,000 in debt that I wasn't even the biggest lesson. Let me tell you a little bit about me and something that happened to me a few years back. I was quite a bit younger, in my 30s, before I really learned how to balance a checkbook. Up to that point, I was just writing checks and I was of the philosophy, hey, if I have checks, I still have money in my account. I had a great job. I made money. I did pay my bills. And I wasn't even sitting around thinking, hey, I need to learn more about money because I thought I already knew it. I got a good job. I had enough money to live how I wanted to live, to pay my bills. I just didn't look at balancing a checkbook as something about learning to make money. And since I thought I was such a savvy financial person and knew all about business and money, because after all, I had a really good job and I thought I understood all about money. Do you know when you tell yourself when you know something and maybe you don't know as much as you thought you did? So, my former husband and I thought it would be a great idea to start a video production company. We had no experience in video production. We didn't know the first thing about writing a business plan, and there were no assets behind the business. However, we did talk my former in laws into putting up their house as collateral for this business that we were going to start. We didn't do any market research. We didn't even know if a video production company would be viable. We just said, hey, this is a great idea. We've got money. And we just thought we could make videos, edit them, sell them, and we'd make even more money. It was during that time when we started this video production company. Believe it or not, I had not ever balanced a checkbook. So I took on the role of learning how to balance a checkbook in my 30s. So that was kind of an eye opener when I realized, oh, we have all this money coming in and look at all this money coming out. Now, some of you listening, you may have started earlier than I did. And so I guess the point of the story is that I had just told myself the story about money, that I understood money. And I just kept telling myself, oh, work hard. That's what I learned. And pay my bills. That's what I learned. When it came to making money, I thought I had all the answers. And so one of the answers then was like, oh, hey, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Let's just start this video business, this video production business. Then fast forward 1 year, we became one of those statistics of failed businesses. So we found ourselves hugely in debt with $60,000. We had a business entity that had no assets and we couldn't even sell anything to make any money back. And we just became another failed business. And, looking back, there's not any blame to go around because I was just as energetic about starting a business as my former partner was. So we just didn't think about money. We had been told and believed the stories about how money had worked. And we had heard them for so long, we didn't even realize they weren't the right stories that we should be listening to. I didn't ask enough questions because I didn't know enough to know which questions to ask. So I didn't ask enough questions, but I didn't even know which questions that I was supposed to be asking because I was going off of my old story about how money works. The point of my story about money was very simple. Work hard, make money, pay bills, and somehow things will always work out, except they did not work out. And what I was left with was a mountain of debt on someone else's house that I just had to pay. This was true debt out of my pocket, or debt that I had accumulated. And now I was going to have to take money out of my pocket to pay off that debt. And here's what I understand now that I couldn't even explain back then. Yes, I did know how to work and I did know how to make money, but those two things weren't the same thing as learning how money works. And nobody had ever made me think differently about how money works. And not only that, no one had ever challenged me or questioned me to think about the difference between earning and making money and making money work for me. I didn't know this story. I wasn't walking around saying, hey, Nancy, here's your belief system about money. I just had assumptions like some of you might. Work hard, get a paycheck, pay the bills, and try to save something. Don't get yourself in trouble. And that's what responsible adults do. And you know what's very interesting to me? Some of those things are absolutely responsible. The problem comes when we stop questioning whether they're the entire story. It took me several more years before I started looking at money again. Not going to lie, starting a business, getting in debt within the first year didn't really inspire me to want to strike out on my own again. But you know what changed my story? What I learned from other people about real estate investing. It made the difference for me to understand how money works. It changed the story. So I had already experienced debt that required money every month to pay off that huge amount of debt. I didn't have an asset to go along with that debt. It wasn't producing income. I was just paying off a debt. Years later, I started learning about real estate investing. I started learning about rental property. I saw something completely different. I saw that there could be debt attached to a property, but there could also be an asset that was making me money while I sleep. There could be a tenant paying rent. There's income coming in, tax benefits, appreciation, and potentially over time, there could be equity in something that I actually owned. And I'm not telling you this story because everyone should go borrow money and buy real estate. That's not the point at all. The point is, I had spent years telling myself one story about debt. Then I finally learned enough to realize there was more to understand. So the facts had not changed, but my understanding had. Let me show you what I mean. Here's my old story, just that I thought debt always equaled money going out. But what I hadn't considered, debt plus an asset plus income. I want to circle the asset and my income. In the past, I'd always experienced debt and money as something going out, something that took away from my earning potential. And I had never considered what debt would look like when it was attached to an asset. So now when I look at debt plus real estate, which is my asset plus income, it moves my needle of how I'm thinking about money and how I came to make money work for me. And today, that's why I pay attention when I hear people make absolute statements about money. Things like real estate is too risky. I don't want debt. I couldn't afford an investment property. My spouse would never go for that. And I'm just not an investor. Maybe every one of those statements is true for you. I'm certainly not here to tell you they are not. But I would ask you one question. How do you know? How do you know? Have you actually looked at the facts, or have you repeated the same story so many times that it now feels like a fact? And here's how easily this can happen. Maybe you had a friend that bought a rental property and they got a terrible, horrible nightmare tenant. And that's something that actually happened. They actually got a bad tenant for their rental property that didn't pay rent, tore up the property. But then that story becomes being a landlord is a nightmare. And then that story eventually becomes real estate investing is not for me. So I just demonstrated how we went from one person's bad experience to a rule about your financial future. And here's another example. Maybe you grew up hearing, we can't afford that. I know that's what I did. I heard that a lot. We can't afford that. And then years later, nobody has to say it anymore. You're just saying it to yourself. And for a long time, I said that before I learned about real estate investing. I said that I can't afford it. Or maybe someone in your family lost money investing. And so the experience was real, but did the experience eventually become investing is basically gambling? Is that the story that the facts became? And those are just some examples about how stories about money become rules about money that we believe. So one thing that I've noticed and come to believe in all of the conversations that I've had with sellers and people interested in real estate investing about houses and money is that people often come to the table with the decision already partly made. The decision might have been made before I even get over to look at the house, before we even have a chance to go through the numbers, or before we're able to talk about what their financial options can be. They've already decided what they believe is possible. And sometimes that's based on facts, but sometimes it's based on a story that they've carried for years. The stories we repeat about money eventually become the rules we live by. Here's what I want you to notice the next time you hear yourself saying, I could never, I would never, people like me don't immediately try to change your mind. I'm not asking you to talk yourself into anything. I just want you to stop and ask, is that something I know? Or is that something I've been telling myself? Because those are two very different things. And sometimes building more options starts with questioning a rule you didn't realize you'd created. And if one of those stories you've been telling yourself is about real estate investing, maybe that it's too complicated or it's too risky or simply not something someone like you does, I'm not going to tell you that you are wrong. What I will tell you is that you deserve enough information to decide for yourself. And that's exactly why I created our free masterclass, Building Income Beyond Your Paycheck. It's designed to help people just like you understand whether real estate investing belongs in your financial options and what you want to create for your future. Not to convince you, but to help you decide with clarity. And you're going to find the link in the description below to that masterclass.